There's a moment I keep coming back to, even now. I'm standing in my parents' living room on a Wednesday evening, still in my work clothes, heels off at the door the way my mother always insisted. The TV is on in the background. My father is at the kitchen table with a stack of papers in front of him, and my mother is sitting across from him with her reading glasses pushed up on her head like she just looked up from something important. And my father says, without looking at me, "We're behind on the mortgage again. You know how tight things have been." I nodded. I always nodded. What I didn't say, what I never said, was that I already knew. I'd been watching their account for months. I need to back up, because this story doesn't make sense without the part that came before it. I'm the older of two daughters. My sister, I'll call her by what she's always been in his family, the younger one, is 3 years behind me. We grew up outside of Columbus, Ohio, in a neighborhood where the houses all looked the same and the lawns were kept up just enough to avoid the HOA notice. My parents weren't struggling, exactly, but they weren't comfortable either. My father worked in logistics for most of my childhood, and my mother did bookkeeping part-time for a dental office. We weren't the family that went to Disney World. We were the family that drove to my aunt's lake house in Michigan every July and called it a vacation. I was the responsible one. I don't say that looking for credit. It was just a fact. The way some kids are quiet and some kids are loud. My sister was the loud one. She was funny in the way that made adults love her. The kind of kid who could walk into a room and make my parents' friends immediately ask, "And who is this one?" She played soccer through high school. She had a group of friends that seemed to rotate around her like planets. My parents went to every game. I ran cross-country. I think they made it to 2 meets in 4 years. I got into a full scholarship program for accounting at Ohio State when I was 17. Not a partial scholarship, full tuition, covered. My parents said they were proud. My father took us to Applebee's that night. My sister ordered the brownie dessert and made everyone laugh by trying to eat it in one bite. It was a good night. I'm not saying it wasn't. I'm just saying that's the night I understood something for the first time. Something I wouldn't be able to name for years. That in this family, my achievements were expected, and my sisters were celebrated. I moved into the dorms in August. I had a meal plan, a work-study job at the campus library, and about $200 in my checking account. I kept my expenses close to zero. I bought textbooks used or borrowed them from the reserve shelf. I ate a lot of rice and eggs my junior year. I graduated without a single dollar of student loan debt, which felt like a miracle at the time, and which I now understand was a miracle I manufactured entirely by myself. My sister, meanwhile, stayed home for community college. She switched majors twice, took summers off, and when she finally transferred to a 4-year school, my parents helped her find an apartment close to campus. They paid her first and last month's rent. They bought her a used car, a Civic, clean, low miles. When I asked my mother about it once, casually, she said, "Well, you had your scholarship. Your sister needs a little more help getting started." I remember closing my eyes for a second before I responded. I said, "That makes sense," and changed the subject. By then, I had my first real job. I was 23, working as a staff accountant at a mid-sized firm in downtown Columbus. I was making $52,000 a year, which felt like an enormous amount of money to me at the time, and which, after rent, utilities, groceries, student loan payments, oh wait, I didn't have those, left me with more savings than I'd ever had. I opened a Roth IRA. I built up an emergency fund. I felt, for the first time in my adult life, like I had some room to breathe. That was when my father called. He called on a Tuesday morning while I was at my desk. I let it go to voicemail and called him back on my lunch break. He said they'd refinanced the house a few years earlier. I didn't know this, and the new payment had adjusted up because it was a variable rate. He said they were a couple months behind. He said the bank had sent a letter. I asked how much. He told me. I asked what they'd tried. He listed a few things: a payment plan they hadn't followed through on, a call to the bank they'd been meaning to make. My mother's hours had been cut at the dental office. He said it the way people say things when they've already decided what the solution is, and they're just waiting for you to arrive at it too. I said I needed to think about it. I called my best friend that night, someone I've known since 7th grade, who I trust more than almost anyone, and she said, "You know you don't have to, right?" I said I knew. I said I'd probably do it anyway. She said, "Yeah, I know. I set up an auto transfer of $1,400 a month. Not the full payment. I wasn't able to cover the whole thing, but enough to make the difference. I told my parents this was temporary until they got back on their feet. My father said thank you. My mother said she didn't know what they'd do without me. I believed her. That was the thing. I actually believed her. 14 months later, I got a promotion. Junior accountant to senior with a bump to $71,000. I was proud of myself in the quiet way I'd learned to be proud of things. No announcement, no celebration, just a feeling I kept mostly to myself. I went to my parents' house that weekend because my mother had asked me to come for dinner. When I got there, my sister was home too, which surprised me. She'd moved back in a few months before after her lease ended, temporarily, until she figured out her next step. She was working at a coffee shop and talking about going back to school for interior design. My mother made her pot roast, which is the meal she makes when she wants a dinner to feel like an occasion. My sister had brought wine. We sat at the table and my mother asked me about work, and I said the promotion had come through. My father raised his glass. My sister said, "That's amazing." And I think she meant it. After dinner, my mother brought out her phone and showed me something. Flights to Portugal. Hotels. A 2-week itinerary she'd clearly spent real time putting together. She said they were planning a trip. A big one. She said my sister had always wanted to see Europe, and that now felt like the right time, before my sister started school again. She said it like this was something that had naturally presented itself, like an opportunity that had come to them, not something they'd chosen. I looked at my father. He was looking at his coffee. I said, "That sounds like a great trip." My mother said, "We're so excited. Your sister has been helping plan it. She found this little village in the Alentejo region." And my sister lit up and started talking about cork forests and wine and a guest house with a terrace. She was glowing. She was genuinely excited. I don't blame her for that part. I want to be clear about that. I drove home that night and did the math in my head. Portugal, 2 weeks. Flights from Columbus, probably with a connection in Lisbon, hotels, food, activities. I'd priced out a similar trip the year before when I was daydreaming in a slow period at work. 2 people, mid-range accommodations, 2 weeks, easily $6,000 to $8,000 depending on the exchange rate. My monthly transfer to my parents was $1,400. I had been sending that transfer for 14 months. I did the math. I want to be honest about what happened in me in the weeks after that dinner, because I think it matters. I didn't explode. I didn't call my mother and have it out. I didn't stop the transfer immediately. I went to work. I came home. I cooked dinner. I went running in the mornings the way I always do. On the outside, nothing changed. But on the inside, I was doing a kind of accounting that had nothing to do with my job. I was tallying things I'd never tallied before. The 2 cross-country meets. The Applebee's versus the car. The scholarship that was celebrated with a chain restaurant and the transfer that was accepted with a phone call. The assumption, never spoken, but always present, that I would figure it out, that I didn't need help, that needing help was somehow for other people. My sister wasn't the villain in this. I want to be clear about that too. She didn't know I was sending money. As far as she knew, our parents were fine, and they were taking her on a trip because they loved her and had the means. She didn't engineer any of this. But she also never asked. She never looked at the numbers. She just accepted the world as it was offered to her, and the world had always been pretty generous. I called the bank after about 3 weeks. I asked about the account status. Current, they said. All payments received. I called my father that same evening. I told him I needed to reduce my contribution for a few months while I handled some things on my end. He said, of course, take whatever time you need. We appreciate everything you do. He said it easily. That's what I remember. He said it the way you say no worries when someone apologizes for being 5 minutes late. I reduced the transfer to $400 that month. Not because I needed the money, because I needed to see what would happen. My mother called 4 days later. She said the payment had gone through late. I said I knew. I'd changed the amount. She said they were counting on that money. I said I knew that too. There was a silence that went on longer than comfortable silences usually do. Then she said, "We just don't understand why you do this right now, with everything going on." I asked what was going on. She said they'd been under a lot of stress. The trip had been expensive. Things were tighter than expected. I let that sit for a moment. Then I said, "Mom, I've been sending you $1,400 a month for over a year. I need to understand what the plan is. When does this end? When does it become something you can handle without my help?" She said, "Your father is looking into some options." I said, "What options?" She said, "There's a lot you don't understand about what we're dealing with." That was the moment. That sentence. "There's a lot you don't understand," said to me. The person who had been quietly underwriting their mortgage for 14 months while they planned a 2-week vacation to Southern Europe. The person who had put herself through college without asking for a single thing. The person who had nodded and said that makes sense when they helped her sister rent an apartment. I said, "Okay, Mom, let me know when you figured out the options." And I hung up. That weekend, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and a legal pad, and I did something I probably should have done a year earlier. I wrote down everything, every transfer, every month, the total. Then I wrote down what I knew they'd spent on the trip. My sister had posted photos, so I had some reference points. I wrote down the car. I wrote down the apartment deposits. I didn't write any of it down to punish myself or to feel like a victim. I wrote it down because I needed to see the shape of it. The shape of it was not what I had told myself it was. I had told myself I was helping my parents through a temporary rough patch. That was the story. The real story, when I looked at the numbers, was that I had been functioning as a silent financial support system for a family that had simultaneously decided, without any discussion, without any excussion, without any acknowledgement, that I was the child who didn't need anything extra, not a trip, not a car, not even a conversation about what was being asked of me. I had made them comfortable enough to be generous with someone else, and I had done it while telling myself it was temporary. I'm not sure how long I sat there. The coffee got cold. I went for a run. When I came back, I took a shower, made dinner, and called my best friend. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about her. When I was done, she said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I think I already know." I sent my father an email the following Monday, not a text, an email, because I wanted something with a record, something that required actual words rather than a thread of back and forth. I told him I was stopping the auto transfer at the end of the month. I told him I cared about them and I wasn't doing this out of anger. I told him I needed them to make a plan that didn't depend on me. I told him I'd be available to talk if he wanted to discuss it. He read it, I could see the receipt, and didn't respond for 6 days. When he did respond, it was 3 sentences. He said he understood. He said he hoped I'd reconsider. He said he hoped I'd reconsider. He said they'd figure something out. My mother called twice that week and I let both calls go to voicemail. The messages were short. She said she didn't understand why I was doing this. She said the family needed to stick together. She said she hoped I'd come to dinner on Sunday. I didn't go to dinner on Sunday. I went to therapy instead, which I'd started about 2 months earlier, not because of any single thing, but because I'd been carrying something heavy for a long time and I was getting tired of the weight. My therapist is someone I trust, practical and direct, and she had a way of asking questions that made me think about things from angles I hadn't considered. She asked me once, "When did you decide that being low maintenance was the same as being loved?" I didn't have an answer for that. I thought about it for a week. I think the answer was somewhere around the second cross-country meet they didn't attend. Somewhere around the night I sat in my dorm room eating peanut butter crackers for dinner while my sister got furniture delivered. Somewhere in the long years of nodding and saying, "That makes sense," and not wanting to be the difficult one. I had made myself easy to overlook because I thought that was what love looked like. I thought the point was to not need anything. I thought if I can just be capable enough, self-sufficient enough, responsible enough, eventually they would see me. Eventually the acknowledgement would come. It didn't come. And I had to sit with what that meant. 3 months after I stopped the transfer, my sister called me. Not my parents, my sister. She asked if she could come over. I said yes, because despite everything, she wasn't the one I was at odds with. She came on a Saturday morning and I made coffee and we sat at my kitchen table the same way we used to sit at our parents' kitchen table when we were kids. And she said, "I didn't know." I said, "I know you didn't." She said she'd found out because my mother had mentioned it, not the full story. Just a fragment, the kind of thing parents let slip when they're trying to explain why something isn't their fault. My sister had asked questions until she got the shape of it. She said she felt sick about it. She said she wished she had known. She said, I would have said something. I believed her. I believe her. She said she'd talked to her parents. She'd told them they needed to refinance, to call the bank, to stop waiting for someone else to solve the problem. She said our father had gotten quiet the way he does, and our mother had cried, but that she'd held the line. She said she was going to help them work out a payment plan, but that she wasn't going to do it for them. I looked at her across the table and I thought, we are not the same, my sister and I. We never were. But she is not who I'd been quietly casting her as in my head either. I said, thank you for coming. She said, I'm sorry it took me this long to understand what you were doing. We sat there a while longer. She told me about the trip, not in the way she told it at dinner, glowing and excited, but in a quieter way, like she was sharing something she now understood differently. She said Portugal was beautiful. She said she'd think about it differently now. That conversation didn't fix everything. Nothing fixes everything. But something shifted, and I noticed it. My parents eventually called a HUD-approved housing counselor, something I'd mentioned in my email, a free resource for homeowners in exactly their situation. They worked out a loan modification with the bank. The payments stabilized. My father picked up some weekend consulting work through a former colleague. My mother's hours came back up. They did not call to tell me any of this directly. I found out through my sister, who had stayed close to the situation the way I no longer was. My mother and I talk now, occasionally. The conversations are careful. There are things neither of us says, which is maybe the most accurate way I can describe where we are. She asked me to come for Thanksgiving last year, and I went, and my father grilled me about my retirement accounts the way fathers do, and my sister brought her boyfriend, and my mother made the pot roast again. I watched my parents across the table that evening, and I tried to see them clearly, not as the parents I'd needed them to be, not as the villains of a story I'd told myself in angry moments, but as people who had made choices out of their own histories, their own blind spots, their own complicated love that probably looked different on the inside than it did from where I was standing. I don't have it all figured out. I'm still in therapy. I still run in the mornings. I still have the legal pad in my kitchen drawer, though I haven't looked at it in a while. What I know is this: the moment I stopped making myself easy to overlook, the moment I asked plainly and without apology, what is the plan? When does this end? What are you going to do? Was the moment something changed. Not in them necessarily. In me. I stopped waiting to be seen. I decided to just be. If you're watching this and something in it feels familiar, if you know what it is to be the one who figures it out, the one who doesn't make a fuss, the one who nods and says, that makes sense, I want you to know something. Your capability is real. Your self-sufficiency is real. But it is not the same as not needing anything, and the people in your life who have let you believe otherwise, even out of love, even without meaning to, have been wrong about you. You were never low maintenance. You were just well-trained to ask for nothing. The asking is allowed. It was always allowed. I'll be right here if you want to talk about it. Leave me a comment below. I read every single one. And if this story found you at the right moment, share it with someone who might need to hear it too. There are more of us out here than you'd think. I've thought a lot about what made me finally stop. Not the Portugal photos, not the math I did at my kitchen table, not even my mother saying there's a lot you don't understand. I think what finally did it was something quieter than any of that. It was realizing that I had built an entire identity around being the one who didn't need anything, and that I had confused that identity with love. That's not a small thing to untangle. When I was sending that $400 every month, I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was doing it because family takes care of family. Both of those things were true, and neither of them was the whole truth. The whole truth was that I had spent most of my life trying to earn my place in my own family by being useful, and the mortgage was just the most recent version of that. Before the mortgage, it was the scholarship I never asked them to celebrate. Before that, it was the meets they didn't attend. Before that, it was something else I've probably forgotten. It was a long pattern. I just hadn't called it by its right name. What I've come to understand, slowly, not all at once, is that there's a difference between being strong and being silent. I was both for a long time, and I let myself believe they were the same thing. They're not. Strength is what you build through hard choices and honest reckoning. Silence is just what happens when you've decided that speaking up costs more than you're willing to spend. I was paying that cost every month, and not just in dollars. My sister coming to my apartment that Saturday morning, that meant something. She didn't have to do that. She could have stayed out of it the way people stay out of things that don't directly affect them. She chose to come anyway. She chose to ask questions until she understood the shape of what had happened. That took something, and I want to name it. It took honesty, and honesty in families is not free. It cost her a hard conversation with our parents. It cost her the easy version of the story she'd been living inside. She paid that cost anyway. I think about that a lot when I think about what intelligence actually means. Not the kind that gets you a scholarship or a promotion, though those matter, but the kind that makes you stop and ask, wait, how is this actually working? Who is carrying what, and did they choose to carry it? My sister asked that question when she didn't have to. My parents never asked it at all. That gap tells you something about how people move through the world and what they leave behind them when they go. And then there's the question of what we do with the things we figure out. I could have stayed angry. There were months where anger was easier than grief, and I let myself have that. But I didn't want anger to be the last word on any of this. Not because my parents deserved grace. They hadn't earned, but because I deserved to put it down. Carrying it forever was just another version of the same old arrangement, me holding something heavy so everyone else could move around freely. I put it down. That was the act of will that mattered most. I'm still in therapy. I still run in the mornings. I still have my legal pad. And I'm still, carefully, in relationship with my parents. Not the relationship I wanted when I was 23, but something real and eyes open and mine. That's enough. Some days it's more than enough.